Prabhupada Paramhansa Paribrajacharyastu Tarasata Shishimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinata Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today is a very special day. We'll be reading about Srila Prabhupada in Butler, Pennsylvania, the first place that he landed when he entered America. His sponsor was there. Actually, it wasn't Gopal Agarwal who sponsored Prabhupada. He wasn't a citizen yet of America. So Gopal's father asked his wife, Sally Agarwal, to sponsor Srila Prabhupada, and she sponsored him. So after Srila Prabhupada entered Samadhi, the devotees got in contact with Sally Agarwal, and they interviewed her several times. And the last time they interviewed her was in New Vrindavan, but before that there were 2 interviews, and a small video was made. So in order to set the scene for today's reading, we're going to hear Sally Agarwal's memories of Srila Prabhupada. वो आवाज आएगा जब चलेंगे? They are it.
The Swami was a friend of my husband's father, Mr. Agarwal, in Agra, India, and he asked me to sponsor the Swami, and that's what I did.
We didn't really think anything would come of agreeing to this proposition. I called my husband at work and I said, Gopal, honey, sit down. We just got a letter, and the Swami is going to come to Boston in 4 days.
The Swami came with so few possessions. He came with the clothes he had on his back, he had a typewriter, and he had his books, and he had a bag of cereal. Imagine coming to a country on the other side of the world with so little.
For his first night in America, he slept on the couch. Next morning, the children came downstairs, and they were in shock, looking at this scary man with orange cloths on him. He loved the children. He played with them, and I could see it was a true love for them, not just fake stuff. Kamla, the older kid, she called him Swami Jesus, because we called him Swami Jesus. We thought that was so funny. He was a lot of fun too. He would go shopping with me at the supermarket. He loved walking through the aisles. And of course, the people stared at him. Every day at 9 o'clock, he would begin to prepare his lunch. It only took me one time to realize that we would like that lunch too. So the kind man he prepared our lunch every single day.
Although it was a small county, I was very much inclined. There were so many churches, and I spoke in many of the churches there.
Lord Jesus Christ, He is the best Son of God. We have all respect for Him. Yes. It does not matter in which country, in which atmosphere you are preaching.
This is class in the devotee. So one has to associate in the devotee before realizing Krishna. But it is not that God has got only one devotee. If God is unlimited, He has unlimited devotee.
He stayed with us for a month in Butler, and I learned, over the time, I learned to love him as I would a father-in-law. I enjoyed my association for that 1 month with him about as much as I've enjoyed anything in my life.
I was just so sad to see him go. See, his Swami, he gave him the job, he told me, of taking the holy book, the Bhagavad-Gita, something, I can't pronounce it, translated into English for the English-speaking world. He was going to New York. It was going to be winter. It was good. Cold weather was blowing already. And I thought, oh, that man, he doesn't have a coat. Nothing to protect him from the weather. He was going on an overnight bus. I'd be scared to go to New York myself. I remember I just could hardly say goodbye to the man. I felt so bad, I cried.
Jai. So this is a glimpse of Srila Prabhupada, how he spent his first 21 days in America. Now we'll, again, before we start reading, I just want to show you some of the reference books where we're getting the information. The Jaladutta diary we've been going through practically every day. And when Prabhupada reached Butler, Pennsylvania, he didn't even have time to write. Whereas previously, on the boat, he had spent 10 full days going across the Atlantic Ocean. Every day he was filling in. But when he reached Butler, that was it. Nothing. And there were pages in between also. They only printed in this book the pages where Prabhupada wrote. And he didn't even have time to write much correspondence. He wrote to Captain Pandya to let him know that he had safely arrived in Butler, Pennsylvania. And he wrote a very long letter to the devotees at the Gaudiya Math here in Mathura. So we'll read that letter. And then there's another book called The Beginning. Now this book was not available to the devotees or to Satsvarup Maharaj when he wrote the Prabhupada Lilamrita. So we'll go through this book. This is beginning with January 1st of 1966, whereas the Jaladutta diary was 1965. And we'll be getting a lot of information from this book as well. And then we have another book that was written by one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples called Yogeshwar Das. Yogeshwar Das, he's a professor in America, specialized professor. And for the academia, he condensed Srila Prabhupada's life into a book that he called Swami in a Strange Land. Now, it just so happens that in the 1960s, there was a very popular book called Stranger in a Strange Land. And all of the youth read it. It was about an alien from another planet who had infiltrated into the Earth planet, and how he was studying and sharing with the Earthlings his lifestyle and his elevated realizations about life. So apparently, Yogeshwar Das, he took that popular book title, Stranger in a Strange Land, and very appropriately converted into Swami in a strange land, because Srila Prabhupada, he was coming from another planet as well. He was coming from Goloka Vrindavan. And he hasn't here because it was written long after the Lilamrita was written. So he has more references that we don't find in the Prabhupada Lilamrita. For instance, now we'll go to the slideshow. Yes. He has a major portion of the article that was written about Prabhupada in the Butler Eagle. Now, this is where we left off last week. Sally, because Srila Prabhupada was immediately a curiosity for whoever saw him. In anxiety, Mrs. Agarwal decided that instead of having people speculate about the strange man in orange robes living in her house, it would be better to let them know about him from the newspapers. She explained her plan to Prabhupada, who laughed, understanding that he didn't fit in. Sally hurried Prabhupada off to a Pittsburgh newspaper office, but the interviewer wasn't able to comprehend why this person should make an interesting story. Sally then took him to the local Butler Eagle, where his presence was accepted as indeed newsworthy. So on September 22nd, remember Prabhupada had just arrived, September 19th, I believe, 17th, 19th. So on September 22nd, the article was printed. It was a feature article that appeared in the Butler Eagle. In fluent English, devotee of Hindu cult explains commission to visit the West. A photographer had come to the Agarwal's apartment, and they had taken this picture. This was the lead photo in the article. Had taken a picture of Srila Prabhupada standing in the living room holding an open volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. The caption read, Ambassador of Bhakti-yoga. Now, it was Prabhupada who made that caption. He'll explain it later when he writes to the devotees in Mathura how that happened. The article began, a slight brown man in faded orange drapes and wearing white bathing shoes stepped out of a compact car yesterday and into the Butler YMCA to attend a meeting. He is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swamiji, a messenger from India to the peoples of the West. The article referred to Srimad Bhagavatam as biblical literature and to Srila Prabhupada as the learned teacher. It continued. This is Prabhupada saying, my mission is to revive a people's God consciousness, says the Swamiji. God is the father of all living beings in thousands of different forms, he explains. Human life is a stage of perfection in evolution. If we miss the message, back we go through the process again, he believes. Bhaktivedanta lives as a monk and permits no woman to touch his food. I don't know where they got that, but because all of us cooked for Prabhupada. On a 6-week ocean voyage and at the Agarwal apartment in Butler, he prepares his meals in a brass pan with separate levels for steaming rice, vegetables, and making bread at the same time. He is a strict vegetarian and is permitted to drink only milk. The miracle food for babies and old men, he noted. If Americans would give more attention to their spiritual life, they would be much happier, he says. So the part of the article that, I'm sorry. Now this is what Yogeshwar was able to find in this article. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, a messenger from India to the people of the West, is fulfilling a mission given to him by his spiritual master to enlighten English-speaking people about their relationship with God. Human life is a stage of perfection and evolution, so that we already got. A simplified version of his theory is that life progresses from aquatic to reptile to bird to beast to beastly human beings and finally to civilized man. After this life, there is still better life on other planets, predicts the visitor. He believes the highest possible state will be, let's see if I can get this last line, to go to God or eternal life. So all of this rang quite well with the Christians, and Butler was predominantly Christian, Protestant, and Catholics, because the Christian preachers also profess that there's the kingdom of God. By chanting the names of God, we can go to God. This is all in the Bible. And even Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they would use Christian jargon when explaining their books and their congregations. They would call the temples churches, and they would refer to the literature as scriptures, just like the Bible. So this is it was understandable to the audience of the Butler Eagle. Now this is Prabhupada cooking. Prabhupada we have a replica of Prabhupada's cooker in Prabhupada's house. Now, Prabhupada, he personally taught me how to cook with his cooker. He was very specific because Prabhupada was a great saver of time. He was so efficient in everything that he did. He wouldn't allow us to waste a moment in the kitchen. So we had half an hour to set up the whole cooker. On the bottom we would put dal. And in the middle we would make little bridges, because there are holes for steam to go up from the dal. We would make little bridges of vegetables so that the holes wouldn't be covered, so that the vegetables would be naturally steamed within. And on the top, we would have a tiffin, and in that tiffin we would put 1 part rice and 2.25 parts water. Very scientific. And we would close that tiffin tightly, and then put around the tiffin potatoes. So every square inch of the cooker was utilized. You turned the cooker on, exactly 45 minutes later, everything would be perfectly cooked. In the meantime, you would make the dough and start preparing the chapatis, but you couldn't start making the chapatis until everything was ready. Because Prabhupada taught me, you roll the chapatis, it should take 1 minute to make a chapati, you run that chapati into Prabhupada, you run back, you make another chapati, you run it in, run it out. So this was before, when Prabhupada's sister taught me how to cook. We would start cooking Prabhupada's lunch at 9 o'clock in the morning. Then Prabhupada called me in one day, and he said to me, when did you start cooking? I said, well, about 2 years ago, Prabhupada. He said, no, what time did you start cooking? I said, I started at 9 o'clock. He said, from now on, you go into the kitchen at 11 o'clock. And then he taught me how to do the cooker. So we had from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock to get everything ready for Prabhupada. And then we would, you see here, well, it's not in this cooker, maybe in the next picture. Let me find the cooker pictures. I have them here. Just so that there, yes. So here's Prabhupada cooking there. Now here's Prabhupada's original cooker. What Shruti Kirti did was, you see the top, He took the top, which was flat, and he made a karai out of the top. See that? So we would just take the top off, and each individual vegetable, we could make about 5 different types of vegetables. One of them always had to be steamed Karilla to control Prabhupada's sugar. Another one, every single day, had to be Shukta, Lord Chaitanya's favorite and Prabhupada's favorite. He would tell us, Shukta had to be there. No, Shukta it's a bitter stew, a wet vegetable made out of about 5 different kinds of vegetables with urad dal, bodis. It's a masterpiece. And many, many, hundreds of different types of varieties of Shukta. But Shukta had to be there every day. A bitter vegetable, like a soup. And then you put in the yogurt, and it was just wonderful. Prabhupada, we make big bowl of it for Prabhupada every day. So we would chaunce all the vegetables, put them on Prabhupada's plate, cover up each of the katoris so everything would stay hot, have the rice in the center. The rice was already in the katori. You didn't even have to touch it. It was so perfectly cooked just by steaming. And put the dal, chaunce the dal, everything chaunced, and then run the plate into Prabhupada, run back and start making the chapatis. So this is how Prabhupada taught us how to cook, and you can see him with the different plates. Because he didn't have that karai on top, he was using a little frying pan to do all of his chaunces. And he would cook like this every day for the Agarwals. Mr. Agarwal would come home and usually have a sandwich. You come home at 11:45, we'll read about it. But when Prabhupada was there, they would all have a beautiful feast every single day. Okay, so now we'll go back to where we are. The Agarwals had their own opinion as to why Prabhupada had come to America, to finance his books and nothing more. So Prabhupada kept that profile while he was in their home. They were sure that he was hoping only to meet someone who could help him with the publication of his Srimad Bhagavatam, and that he did not want any followers. At least they hoped he wouldn't do anything to attract attention, and they felt that this was his mentality also. Sally says, he didn't create waves. He didn't want any crowd. He didn't want anything. He only wanted to finance his books. Perhaps Prabhupada, seeing their nervousness, agreed to keep a low profile out of consideration for his hosts. At Prabhupada's request, however, Mr. Agarwal held a kind of open house in his apartment every night from 6 to 9. Sally explains, it was quite an intellectual group that we were in, and they were fascinated by him. They hardly knew what to ask him. They didn't know enough. This was just like a dream out of a book. Who would expect to meet a Swami in someone's living room in Butler, Pennsylvania? It was just really tremendous. In the middle of middle-class America. You know, there's an expression, elephant in the living room. So here in Butler, we had Swami in the living room, and no one quite knew what to make of it. My parents came from quite a distance to see him. We knew a lot of people in Pittsburgh, and they came up. This was a very unusual thing, having him here. But the real interest shown in him was only as a curiosity. And Prabhupada wasn't trying to proselytize in Butler, Pennsylvania. He was studying the American culture there. He had a typewriter, which was one of his few possessions, and an umbrella. That was one of the things that caused a sensation, that he always carried an umbrella. Now this is what the Brahmins do here in India. If you find a first-class Brahmin, he'll always have his umbrella with him. And it was a little chilly, and he was balding. And so he always wore this hat that someone had made for him, like a swimming cap. I think we have that picture there. It's a Swami hat. But in America, they had never seen anything like that. So in America, because people like to keep their hair in place, when they swim, they wear a little cap like that and tie it around their chin to keep their hair dry. So that was the only thing that they could compare Prabhupada's Swami hat to. It was a kind of sensation. And he was so brilliant that when he saw someone twice, he knew who they were. He remembered. He was a brilliant man. Or if he met them in our apartment and saw them in a car, he would remember their name. And he would wave and say their name. He was a brilliant man. All the people liked him. They were amazed at how intelligent he was. The thing that got them was the way he remembered their name and his humorous way. He looked so serious all the time, but he was a very humorous person. He was forbidding in his looks, but he was very charming. He was the easiest guest I have ever had in my life, because when I couldn't spend time with him, he chanted, and I knew he was perfectly happy. When I couldn't talk to him, he chanted. He was so easy, though, because I knew he was never bored. I never felt any pressure or tension about having him. He was so easy that when I had to take care of the children, he would just chant. It was so great. When I had to do things, he would just be happy chanting. He was a very good guest. When the people would come, they were always smoking cigarettes. But he would say, "Pay no attention, think nothing of it." That's what he said, think nothing of it. Because he knew we were different, I didn't smoke in front of him. I knew I wasn't supposed to smoke in front of Gopal's father, so I sort of considered him the same. He didn't make any problems for anybody. One evening, a guest asked Prabhupada, "What do you think of Jesus Christ?" And Prabhupada replied, "He is the Son of God." Then he added that he, the guest, was also a son of God. Everyone was interested to hear that the Swami accepted Jesus Christ as the Son of God. Now Gopal Agarwal speaks. His intent was not to have you change your way of life. He wasn't telling anybody they should be vegetarian or anything. All he wanted you to do was follow what you are, but be better. He didn't stress that we should give up many things. So this was what Srila Prabhupada also learned from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, this process of preaching. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, when he first sent his disciples to London, he had a plan that he would make a student hostel. And he said that in order to have the students stay in the hostel, he was even prepared to serve them meat in order that they would stay there and they would hear the philosophy. So Prabhupada also, when he first began preaching, he didn't make any demands on his first visitors. He simply had them chant Hare Krishna, because Prabhupada explains later that you won't understand the philosophy unless your mind is purified. And the way to purify the mind is by chanting Hare Krishna. So Prabhupada stressed the chanting of Hare Krishna, specifically through Kirtan and Sankirtan. Later, when some of his students and followers became serious and they were ready to follow, then he offered them initiation, whereby they had to take lifetime vows. But that was long afterwards, practically almost a year after Prabhupada's arrival in Butler, Pennsylvania. Srila Prabhupada followed a regulated daily schedule. Every morning he would walk the 6 or 7 blocks from the YMCA to Sterling Apartments, arriving there about 7. So this is the YMCA building. This is a close-up. Their logo, Young Men's Christian Association. Gopal Agarwal was the first Indian who ever lived in Butler, Pennsylvania. It was strictly Christian. We'll hear more later. This is the room. It might not be the exact room, but all the rooms were set up the same way, with a bed, a desk, a chair, and a bureau. The room in the YMCA. This is Prabhupada. When he had first landed in New York, he had in his luggage a large bundle of dried cereal, similar to rolled oats. So this is flat rice, or chira. I have a picture of it here. We all know what chira is because we live here in India. But Americans had never seen chira before. So even after Prabhupada preached all over the world, came back here to India, every morning Prabhupada would still have chira. And Prabhupada's sister taught me how to make the chira the way Prabhupada liked it. These are all secrets. She learned from her mother, and she taught us, her children, and Prabhupada's children. So I'll teach you the secret of how to make chira for Prabhupada that he ate in the morning for his breakfast. And he also said chira had to be there. Every morning we made this for Prabhupada. You take the chira and you put it in a bowl or a pot and you cover it with water. One time only. You cover it with water and you pour the water out. And then you let the chira sit 5 to 10 minutes. And the chira will naturally absorb the water, even though all the water has been poured out. And then you boil milk. And just when you're ready to serve Prabhupada the chira, in a large bowl we had, and the funny thing is, because we were cooking right here for Prabhupada in his home here, and we had very little facility at that time. And when I had just come from America, I was thinking, now what am I going to need in India? You know, we didn't know what to expect. So I brought a big bowl with me. I was thinking, well, if nothing else, I could fill the bowl up every day with whatever was there. And when Pishima saw that bowl, she took it from me. And she used it for Prabhupada. I was struggling at how she's using my bowl, but it didn't matter. It was the perfect size for Prabhupada's chira, for Prabhupada's sukta, everything. So my bowl got donated to Prabhupada. I didn't even think I got to eat from it. She just grabbed it right away. So we would put the chira in there, and just when and aside from that, Prabhupada had a very set breakfast that Pishima taught me. We would cut up all different kinds of fruits, whatever was available. And someone had given to Prabhupada macadamia nuts. We would put like a few macadamia nuts. And the first thing that Prabhupada ate, every single morning, we would grate ginger and squeeze a little lemon on it, makes it pink, a beautiful color. And the night before, we would soak chickpeas. So the chickpeas had to be there, the ginger had to be there, because that would be the first thing that Prabhupada would eat. And then he would have the chira, he would have fruits. We would make sandesh, rasgulla, whatever milk products, milk sweets we could make. Of course, when the temple opened, we would bring the Mangalarti sweets. But sandesh always had to be there. That was Prabhupada's favorite sweet. And then we would make urad dal wada, not the South Indian style, Bengali style. And that means the night before we would soak the urad dal. We didn't have electricity, so we would hand grind on the shilbata, the urad, and then we would mix in it ginger and green chilies crushed up and all kinds of delicious digestive spices, roll the urad into balls and fry them in ghee. And then we would make coconut chutney. We had our coconut scraper, make it very fine, and you make a chons, add a little dahi, little yogurt, and also dahi had to be there. So when Prabhupada would eat, he would have all these things on his plate, and in the middle of the plate, he would, like a chemist, he'd put the chira, he'd put the dahi, he'd mix the fruits, everything like that. And when he was really hungry, I remember one morning, Prabhupada came from the temple because he would go out at like 5 in the morning, 5:30, go on his morning walk, come back exactly in time for greeting the deities, and then we would have Guru Puja, we would have class. So Prabhupada had already been up since 1 o'clock in the morning, doing his translations, chanting his Gayatri, watching that we were all going to Mangalarti, watch it from his window to see who was late. We'd get called in if we were late. And then after the class, he would come in to have his breakfast prasadam. So one morning, he must have been really hungry. He just took an urdal vada and threw it into his mouth before he even sat down. So this was Prabhupada's breakfast. So even when he was here, that's why he brought the chira with him. Because he didn't expect that he would be able to find it in America. So this supply was enough for several weeks, and every morning at breakfast he would take some with milk. At 7:45, Gopal would leave for work, and around 9:30, Prabhupada would start preparing his lunch in the kitchen. He made his chapatis by hand. So I don't know if any of you know how to make chapatis by hand. You just use your hand to flatten them out. So, without even a rolling pin. He worked alone for 2 hours, while Mrs. Agarwal did housework and took care of her children. At 11:30, he took prasadam. Sally speaks. When he cooked, he used only one burner. The bottom level pot created the steam. He had the dal on the bottom, and he created the steam to cook many other vegetables. So for about a week, he was cooking this great big lunch, which was ready about 11:30, and Gopal always came home for lunch around 12. I used to serve Gopal a sandwich, and then he would go back to work. But it didn't take me long to realize that the food the Swami was cooking, we'd enjoy too. So he started cooking that noon meal for all of us. Oh, and we enjoyed it so much. Our fun was to show him what we knew of America, and he had never seen such things. It was such fun to take him to the supermarket. So I have here some pictures of the supermarket. That's the laundromat here. Now, have you ever seen anything like this in India? When we came to India, the best you could get was a kirana dukan, right? That's all there was here in Vrindavan. One man sitting with his tin cans, and you just told him what you wanted, and that's what you got. You couldn't touch anything, you couldn't enter the shop, nothing. So, and then Prabhupada comes to America, and you can spend your whole lifetime going through all the aisles in the supermarkets. So Prabhupada, he was just so amazed, and all the vegetables, the frozen vegetables, pre-cut, clean already. So he would go to the refrigerator and just, take out the boxes of frozen vegetables and put them into his cooker sometimes. Or he would go and choose what he wanted. He was able to find the vegetables that he liked. We'll read about that later. Okay. He had never seen such things. It was such fun to take him to the supermarket. He loved opening the package of okra or frozen beans, and he didn't have to clean them and cut them and do all those things. He opened the freezer every day and just chose his items. It was fun to watch him. He sat on the couch while I swept with the vacuum cleaner. And he was so interested in that. And we talked for a long time about that. He was so interesting. These were all firsts for Prabhupada because none of these things existed in India. So every day he'd have this big feast and everything was great fun. We really enjoyed it. And I would help him cut the things. He would spice it and we would laugh. He was the most enjoyable man. Most enjoyable man. I really felt like a sort of daughter to him, even in such a short time, like he was my father-in-law. He was a friend of my father-in-law, but I really felt very close to him. He enjoyed everything. I liked him. I thought he was tremendous. So, let's see. Another thing that Prabhupada really was quite astounded by was the laundromats. Because Prabhupada, of course, he would still wash his own clothes, but in America, when you live in an apartment, in those days at least, in the 60s, you didn't have the facility of washer, dryer, things like that. So people would go to the laundromats, and again, Prabhupada had never seen anything like an American laundromat. So he was just mind-boggled by all of the different amenities that they had in America that weren't available in India. After lunch, Prabhupada would leave about 1 p.m. and walk to the YMCA, where the Agarwals figured he must have worked at his writing until 5. He would come back to their apartment about 6 in the evening after they had taken their meal. They ate meat. So Mrs. Agarwal was careful to have it cleared away before he came. When one night he came early, she said, "Oh, Swamiji, we have just cooked meat, and the smell will be very disagreeable to you." But he said, "Oh, think nothing of it. Think nothing of it." Prabhupada was so tolerant. In the evening, he would speak with guests. The guests would usually take coffee and other refreshments, but he would request a glass of warm milk at 9 o'clock. So this is exactly the way Prabhupada lived, even up to the last, before he wasn't able to eat anymore. Every night, 9 o'clock, we would make milk for Prabhupada, but we would make it in a special way. We would take the hot milk. The milk would come from the Goshala when we were here in Vrindavan, but Prabhupada did the same thing wherever he was. Anywhere we cooked for Prabhupada, at least here in India. If it was Delhi, Calcutta, Mayapur, Ahmedabad, Bombay, anywhere, Prabhupada had the same eating schedule. 4 times a day Prabhupada would eat. So we heard his breakfast, we heard his lunch, and then Prabhupada would take a little rest after his lunch. When he would get out of his resting, we would bring Prabhupada some fruit juice. It had to be made by us, nothing from outside, ever. One time, one devotee brought Prabhupada some juice from outside, and he called her a rascal. And we had to make sure, that this was taught to me by Prabhupada's servant, we had to taste the juice first to make sure that it wasn't sour. So sometimes you had to do that just to make sure. So then, 9 o'clock at night, we would make milk. So we would boil the milk 3 times, boil the milk, let it foam, and then come down 3 times. That was the pasteurization. And then we would take 2 glasses and pour the milk back and forth till it became very fluffy and light. And then we would grind on the silbata mishri, and we would sweeten it with mishri. And then we would also make a grain for Prabhupada every night. He loved to have kachuris at night. Sometimes I'd make him 5 kachuris, and they would all disappear. I don't know. Or we would make him puffed rice, or we would make him popper. In the West, they would make him popcorn. We didn't have popcorn here in those days. We'd always have something, and always we would have a little container of sandesh that Prabhupada would keep at his desk, so that during the night when he was translating, he would be able to take a little bit of sandesh. So that was Prabhupada's eating. So here, also, 1965, at 9 o'clock, Prabhupada would have his hot milk. He would stay, speaking until 9:30 or 10, and then Mr. Agarwal would drive him back to the YMCA. Prabhupada would also do his own laundry every day. He washed his clothes in the Agarwal's bathroom and hung them to dry outside. He sometimes accompanied the Agarwals to the laundromat and was interested to see how Americans washed and dried their clothes. To Sally, he seemed very interested in the American ways and people. Sally, now we have the story of, let's see if we can find it. There. Our boy Bridge was 6 or 7 months old when the Swami came, and the Indians love boys. The Swami liked Bridge. He was there when Bridge first stood. The first time Bridge made the attempt and actually succeeded, the Swami stood up and clapped. It was a celebration. Another time, our baby teethed on the Swami's shoes. I thought, oh, those shoes. They've been all over India, and my kid is chewing on them. Kids are the same in every country. You know how a mother would feel. Almost every night he used to sit in the next door neighbor's backyard. We sat out there sometimes with him, or we stayed in the living room. One time something happened with our little girl, Pamela. Actually, Kamala was her name, who was only 3 years old. I used to take her to Sunday school, and she learned about Jesus in Sunday school. Then, when she would see Swamiji with his robes on and everything, she called him Swami Jesus. And this one time, when it first dawned on us what she was saying, she called him Swami Jesus, and the Swami smiled and said, he was quoting from the Bible, "And a little child shall lead them." It was so funny. So for a little child, they always try to accommodate, what they've learned and what they're seeing. So Sally and Gopal would call Prabhupada Swamiji. So she turned it into Swami Jesus. Prabhupada spoke to various groups in the community. He spoke at the Lions Club. I have that picture somewhere. This is the Slippery Rock College that Prabhupada spoke at. Here, the Lions Club. This was a Christian seminary college that Prabhupada spoke at in a nearby town called Herman. Prabhupada spoke at various groups in the community. He spoke at the Lions Club in early October and received a formal document. This is what the document said. Be it known that A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami was a guest at the Lions Club of Butler, PA, and as an expression of appreciation for services rendered, the club tenders this acknowledgement. He also gave a talk at the Y, that's the YMCA, and at St. Fidelis Seminary College in Herman, Pennsylvania. So this is the prestigious seminary college. A seminary college is where the young men are trained to be priests. And they were so broad-minded that they invited Prabhupada to speak there. And he spoke regularly to the guests at the Agarwal home. Now we'll go back to this picture. This is quite a well-known college in Pennsylvania. When Professor Larson, the chairman of the philosophy department at Slippery Rock State College, read in the Butler Eagle of a visiting Indian Swami and Vedic scholar, he phoned the Agarwal's home to invite Prabhupada to lecture on campus. Professor Alan Larson says, I called the number given in the newspaper article, but it turned out that the Swami was actually staying in a room at the YMCA. When I arrived, he was waiting on the street corner, and I picked him up. He seemed very much alone. When we were driving to Slippery Rock, I asked him to pronounce his name for me so I would have it right when I introduced him to my class. He said, Swamiji Bhaktivedanta. And then he proceeded to tell me what it meant. Since I was not used to Indian names, he had to repeat it several times before I got it right. He showed no impatience with my slowness. Even at this early junction of our association, I was convinced that this man had an inner stability and strength that would be very difficult to shake. And this initial impression was further reinforced throughout the rather busy day. 100 students from several classes had gathered to hear the lecture, as Prabhupada, in his natural, unrehearsed manner, walked down the aisle, up the 3 wooden steps, and onto the plain wooden stage. He sat down, erect and cross-legged, and began softly singing Hare Krishna, his eyes closed. Then he stood and spoke without a lectern or microphone, and answered questions from the audience. The program lasted only 50 minutes and ended abruptly with the bell signaling the next class. Now Professor Larson says, after the first class, I had a short conversation with the Swamiji while sitting outside on a bench on the campus lawn. Most of the time, when he was not directly engaged in conversation, he would repeat a short prayer while moving prayer beads through his fingers. He was sitting up cross-legged, and we were speaking back and forth. He said that the trees around us were beautiful, and he asked, "What kind of trees are these?" I replied, "They're shade trees." Then he said that it was too bad they weren't fruit or nut trees to provide food and benefit people. At 1 o'clock, Prabhupada lectured again. Afterward, he accompanied Dr. Mohan Sharma, a member of the faculty who had attended the lecture, and his 16-year-old daughter, Minnie, to Dr. Sharma's campus residence. Prabhupada accepted warm milk and dried fruit, and at Dr. Sharma's request, blessed his home and touched the forehead of his daughter in a gesture of benediction. Around 3 o'clock, Professor Larson drove him back to Butler. Professor Alan Larson says, the Swamiji seemed to present himself as an Indian scholar who had come for a short time to do translation work. I never thought of him as a missionary, but during the course of the day, there grew in me a warm affection for this man, because he was unmistakably a good man who had found his way to a stability and peace that is very rare. So from here, we only have 5 minutes, but I have so much more to show in this. I just want to share it with you. Whoops, wait a minute. If I can get it all in order. I think we've seen all. Now, this is a very long letter that Prabhupada wrote to his friend Narayan Maharaj, who was his junior. Narayan Maharaj at the Keshav Gaudiya Math. Of course, we're all familiar with Narayan Maharaj because he came to prominence after Prabhupada left. But at that time, he was a junior sannyasi, and he had performed the sannyas ceremony while his guru, Bhakti Pragya Keshav Maharaj, was awarding Prabhupada with the sannyas order. So they became friends because Prabhupada used to live at the Keshav Gaudiya Math, and Prabhupada used to do editing for their literature there in English, Bengali, Hindi, Sanskrit. So they had a friendship. And this was the only letter that Prabhupada wrote that we have on record when he was in Butler, Pennsylvania. But since we only have 5 minutes, next week we'll read it because Prabhupada gives a full description of his experiences, his activities, and his realizations of how he's going to carry on the mission of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati while he's in America. So we'll save this for next week. And I'll just go on with a little bit more reading for the few minutes that we have. The lectures in Pennsylvania gave Prabhupada his first readings of how his message would be received in America. At Commonwealth Pier in Boston, he had stated in his poem, quote, "I am sure that when this transcendental message penetrates their hearts, they will certainly feel gladdened and thus become liberated from all unhappy conditions of life," unquote. Now, this principle was actually being tested in the field. Would they be able to understand? Were they interested? Would they surrender? So I'm just going to show the further pictures that we have here. This is Pennsylvania. Because I grew up in Pennsylvania the first 18 years of my life. Pennsylvania, you don't really go to Pennsylvania to start a missionary revolution around the world. In Pennsylvania, the only thing to do, and the only thing I did the first 18 years of my life is walk in the forests, because that's all we had to do. We'd walk in the forests, we'd swim in the rivers, we'd watch the birds and the animals, and once in a while you would see a human being. But it's it's so mode of goodness there. When the devotees finally came to Pennsylvania from 26 Second Avenue, then from 61 Second Avenue, one devotee told me it was so quiet in Philadelphia, which is the biggest city in the whole state, that while he was on Sankirtan, while he was distributing Back to Godhead magazines, he would fall asleep. Because he was used to New York, you know. So it was nice because Prabhupada saw, before he entered into the Big Apple of New York City, he saw the beautiful countryside. He met the pious people who were, although mlecha, although outcast, Prabhupada called them, because everyone in America is an outcast, mlecha, yavana, or worse. But he saw a beautiful side of America, which was Pennsylvania, and he was able to meet very pious people. Although they were meat eaters, they still had some dharma. And it was a springboard for his real purpose. He also, when he decided that after 21 days that he had done as much as he was able to accomplish in Butler, he made a special trip. Prabhupada was studying where the universities would be interested in Prabhupada's books. So he didn't go directly to New York. He took the bus to Philadelphia. And there at the University of Pennsylvania, he met one Dr. Norman Brown. He did a program there at the university. He placed his books for Dr. Brown for the library. So Prabhupada was already, because he had already done this groundwork in India, and his books had already been placed in the major American libraries because the American embassy in Delhi had taken his books to put in the major libraries. So Prabhupada went there to Philadelphia, and then from Philadelphia, it's just an hour and a half away to New York. Then he went up to New York. So Prabhupada was always meditating. How is he going to carry on his mission that his spiritual master had given him? And next week, we'll start with the letter that Prabhupada wrote so we can go in a little deeper what Prabhupada's impressions were of America and how he was going to carry on his mission. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.